All right, this is going to be my first instructional video on the Saab 900. And today I'm going to be showing you how to pull the CV axle, the spindle, and the ball joints from the car. And, there's a few reasons you might want to do this. If you want to replace the CV axles, if you want to do front wheel bearings or replace the ball joints. This video, I'm pulling everything because I'm actually taking the engine out of the car and I wanted to replace the CV axles, which are only about $40 while I was doing that. And I also noticed while I was pulling the CV axle that my ball joints really should be replaced as well. So I pulled everything. This usually would not be necessary to pull all of this, but the steps I'm going to show you how to do this will work if you just want to, replace a ball joint or pull the CV axle. You could kind of just follow along and just do the parts you need to, and the parts you don't need to, you're good. For this job, you don't really need any special tools except maybe a ball joint puller. That's my favorite ball joint puller over there. I'll put a link to that, but that worked really well to pull everything. An impact gun would be handy, but not necessary. And other than that, just equipment to safely jack up and block your car and standard, wrenches and ratchets. So let's go ahead and show you how to do this.
Okay, another thing you should do before you jack up the car is put this special tool right underneath this the lower A-arm that keeps the suspension from hanging down. So if you get a little wider view, you can see where it goes. People could do this with all sorts of stuff. You could jam pieces of wood in there or just an old wrench, but you could buy these tools on eBay for like under 30 bucks, and honestly I recommend you just pick one up, but you should have something there to keep the suspension from dangling when you jack up the car. It's going to make working on this a lot easier.
So there is one thing you should probably do before you pull the before you put the Saab up on jack stands, and that is to loosen the axle nut, which is right here. You could take this off with the wheel still on the car, at least loosen it. I want to take it all the way off. You could break that nut. It's going to be on there really tight. I forgot to do this, so I was able to remove that nut with an impact gun, and I used my 1 1/4 inch socket, which fit well on there. And even with the car on jack stands, I was able to remove that pretty easily with the impact gun. Also, before you really get started with anything, you should take your favorite penetrating fluid and soak your ball joint nuts. There are 2 on top, right there and there. And there are 2 on the bottom. Let's see, down here. Yep, there they are. These can be hard to get off, although on the passenger side of my car, they really weren't that hard to do. But take your favorite penetrating fluid, soak this up while you do some other prep steps. All right, I'm here under the car, and this is probably the only thing you have to do under the car. You have to remove the clamp from the inner CV boot right here. I've already taken this one off, and then you should pry off the CV boot from the transmission. Just be careful when you do this, because if you're saving the CV axle, let's say you're pulling the engine, you just want to pull it off a little bit and then put it back on, or for some other reason you're saving it, you're not replacing it, any dirt that gets in there is going to basically ruin it. So you should really clean this all up and be really clean while you're doing this. I'm pulling these out and replacing them, and I'm also replacing the transmission, so I'm just going to pull it out. But that's the first thing you have to do under the car once you have the car safely secured on jack stands. And the first thing I'm going to remove, now that I have the car up on jack stands and everything, is this tie rod end. It's a 19mm bolt, and then we'll have to use a puller to pop it out. I'll show you how to do that. But just get yourself a good deep 19mm socket and pull and remove this bolt. Alright, so here's my favorite ball joint puller. I find this easier to work with than like the classic pickle fork. And I'll put a link to, I think I just got this at AutoZone, but I'll put a link to it in the description. But the way it works is you just slide this in between, underneath the dust boot here of the ball joint, and you just tighten down this bolt here until it starts to push on the screw. And then you could either do this by hand or with the impact socket. I'll just do it with the impact socket because I have it right here. That's it. Very easy. Saves me a ton of time. Now that we have the tie rod off the steering knuckle here, we could just rotate this and get really easy access to what we have to do next. Which one? Get this light so you can see a little better. Which is to pull the brake caliper, which is pretty easy. You're just going to need a 15mm wrench to hold the brake caliper bolt on that side, and a 13mm socket to pull it on this side. There's two, one here, one down here. They shouldn't be super tight. When you replace these, make sure you put Loctite on them. On this particular car, they really don't bite in. There's not a whole lot of threads that bite in. And once you have those off, we're going to take the caliper and hang it up, tie it up to the spring somewhere so it's safely out of the way. Looks like I'm going to have to do a brake job too. Again, if you have ABS, you probably want to remove the ABS sensor right here on the back of the knuckle. Just one 10mm bolt, and then you can hang this up out of the way. Okay, now we're going to start to take off the upper ball joint bolts. There are two of them. And on mine, these are both 17mm. And you're going to need a socket for this side. This is closer to the back of the car. And also to secure the bolt. And this is a little tighter because there's wires and, well, there's cables and stuff over here, like for the parking brake and the ABS system over here. So put a deep socket on here. A regular socket should work on this side. You're going to need two ratchets. Well, you could pull this off with a wrench, but two ratchets is going to be easiest. And pull these. Just so you know, there's also ball joints here in the bottom. We'll do those next. And the upper and lower ball joints are identical on this car, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. I'm replacing these ball joints, so I'm just going to pull these out. But if you just need to loosen them for a job, that's where they are. All right, now we're going to do the lower ball joints right here. These have a tendency, from what I've read, to be much tighter than the upper ball joints, harder to remove. Although nothing has been terribly hard to remove on this car so far. So you can see everything has a very thick protective coat of grease on it. I'm going to start with my 17 ratchet, which has a little bit longer handle, and I'll switch to the flex head and pull these off too. Not too hard. Okay, after you remove your ball joint bolts, the two on the top and two on the bottom, you have your tie rod removed, your caliper hung up. You could take off this bolt if it's not, this axle nut, if it's not all the way removed yet. And there's really not much else holding on this spindle to the car than friction at this point. So I'm gonna give this axle a couple taps to separate it from the spindle. I'm gonna pull the spindle out. It's gonna be stuck on there a little bit just due to friction. Once that's all loosened and pulled out, I will yank out the CV axle. I'm gonna be a little rough and kind of just be yanking on things here because I'm replacing the CV axle. I'm taking this off. You can get the CV axle out just kind of by tilting it. You see there? I don't even need to tap it. It's already loose. And you don't even have to take the whole spindle off if you don't want to, but I'm just going to take off the spindle, pull out the CV axle, and then I'm done for now. Alright, be careful if you're pulling this out and you're keeping it. These needle bearings are not held on by much. You also don't want to get dirt in here. I'm replacing this, so I don't really care. And make sure you might have to
I'm gonna have to tie this up a little bit more out of the way. On the other side of the car as well, the part that stuck was the upper ball joint. My lower ball joint came out. My upper ball joint's still here. I'm gonna give it a little bit of penetrating fluid and just kind of work that out with a pry bar and separate the entire spindle. All right, and so the last thing we really have to do is take off these ball joints. Now, I suppose we could have taken these off first. On the other side, I took them off once it was on the bench, or in this case, the ground, because I don't feel like going to the bench. You can see this ball joint is completely shot. No grease there. Glad I'm replacing this. And this one looks pretty good. I'm going to replace it anyway. These are really cheap. This one is probably fine, though. Helps to have a impact wrench. Take these off. I'm going to go ahead and whack this one off. So this bolt actually won't come out all the way, so just bring it out so it's the end of the bolt is kind of lined up to the end of the nut here. Rather, the end of the nut's lined up to the end of the bolt, and then we'll use the ball joint puller to pop this off. All right, I'm back here with my trusty ball joint puller on the ball joint. And I highly recommend you leave this nut on, loosen it, so you have a gap there, and then leave it on, because I did this on the other side. I took the nut off, used the ball joint puller, and the ball joint just shot at a high rate of speed to the other side of the garage. It was actually pretty dangerous, so. Okay, and then once you have both ball joints popped off, the knuckle there, you might have to use a vice grip to grab this little spindle here while you undo the bolt. But other than that, you're basically done. So you probably won't have to do all of this with whatever job you're doing, unless you're doing exactly what I'm doing. But I hope this helps people see how things are disassembled and put together here on the Saab 900 front suspension and steering.